Not every book is meant to caress. Some explore the cruel reality of life. The topic we're looking at today is childhood grief fiction. Hi, I'm Justine and this is Bookends. Today I'm going to chat with Sina Queyras about her first novel, Autobiography of Childhood. This is not a bedtime story. It's real, it's devastating. It's about 5 siblings who lose a brother when they're kids, and they're about to lose a sister as well. Each realizes that as an adult, they never actually left childhood behind. We're also at Type Books today to get a few other recommendations. Let's go on in. I have Sina Queyras with me here. Sina, thanks so much for meeting up with us today.
Thanks for asking me. It's a pleasure.
Now, this book it deals with a very difficult subject matter.
Yes.
How difficult is it to write a book like that where, nothing ever goes well?
Well, I mean, some things go well, but, we're looking at a very short window of time, right? So it's very compressed, and yes, it seems everything is very fraught, but it's...
I mean, like, from your perspective, when you spend time writing something that's so difficult, even to read, is that difficult to write as well?
Yes. It's difficult to be in that world, and every time I have to read from it, I have to, of course, go back into the world. And I have to go back into that world with enough belief that I can actually give the characters the kind of respect and the self-respect and the kind of, honor their experience. So it means that I have to go back into that moment of intense grief or intense, anger, and that can be difficult.
Now, this was your first novel, and you are first and foremost a poet, or you were.
I was a poet, yeah.
Was it difficult to make that switch over from poetry to prose?
Well, it wasn't actually a switch because I started writing fiction a long time ago, and it's just taken me a lot longer to find my legs or to write something that I was really happy with. And this novel is the first piece of fiction that... I've published stories before, but this novel is the first piece of fiction that I was excited by. I think I did what I wanted to do in a way that I was happy with.
Why do you think it was so much more difficult for you to write prose that you were happy with as opposed to poetry that you were happy with?
I can't say that poetry is easier. That would be... no, I don't think that's it, because poetry is much more difficult, and in my poetry, in any case, is even more emotionally kind of difficult for me to write. But I think that there's something more forgiving in the poetic form. You can take a smaller chunk, and English has always been a challenge for me. So to learn how to write a sentence of any kind of length, and then a novel is all these different sentences that are bouncing off of each other. So then learning the relationship between those sentences and being able to sustain that over the duration of a novel it's not easy.
Now, this novel really deals with memories and, the characters going back in the past. Are you one of those people who, dwells on little things, whether you think like, oh, I should have done that differently, this differently?
Absolutely. I'm a woman, first of all. No, yeah, I do. I'm a total... I'm going to leave this interview and say, I should have done this, and I should have done that, and I should have done this. Absolutely. But I think that through this writing of this story, I have to say that I do feel like there are all these questions that I've been able to leave behind. So it was really kind of liberating and transformative.
What do you mean by that?
Well, questions about my own process, my own childhood, my own kind of relationship with grief, how I've held on to certain things maybe too long. Or maybe just long enough. I don't know, but I'm going to be in critical mind now and say maybe too long we hold on to some things from childhood, and they go from being memories to these kind of like worry beads that we play with almost. They become very hard and they become very daily.
Are there parts of, for example, your childhood that you think you're still stuck in?
I don't think we ever really get rid of, get outside of it. But I think much less, absolutely. I think that in my 20s, sometimes I think back on my 20s and I'm amazed that I was able to function, because I don't think I was really very alert and very aware. My behaviors were I was caught in a set of responses, automatic responses, that I was very unconscious of. And it was painful. But I don't feel that anymore.
Is there any kind of loss and grief in your past that you've dealt with that helped you with writing this book?
Well, yeah, that part's autobiographical. I mean, I've lost my brother when I was 5, and I lost my mother, my father, and my sister in the past 8, 9 years. Mother, father, and sister, and brother, actually. So that was all very helpful because it made me come to terms with, yes, all those unresolved deaths. And I wouldn't say I'm a champion at dealing with death, but I'm a little better.
Why did you decide to write this book then?
Well, I decided to write it, I wanted to write the story of childhood and for a long time, and I wanted to write the story of this loss, this childhood loss. It's something that's fascinated me since I began writing. And I chose to write this in particular as a kind of nod to Virginia Woolf. The Lighthouse is one of my favorite novels, and Mrs. Dalloway, and she's been a talisman for me. She's been a rock.
Now, you wrote this from 6 different perspectives, 5 siblings and the father.
And the father, yeah.
How did you go about that, writing? Because when I'm reading it, every single person deals with grief in their own way. How did you go about figuring out, 6 different ways of dealing with grief?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not going to tell you I'm not going to tell you exactly how, but I did make certain decisions. I had certain criteria that I was looking for in each of the characters, and I gave them they each have these 5 things. And I'm not going to tell you what that is because that would spoil the novel. But that was a way for me to make sure that they were going to cover the same area and that they were going to kind of speak to each other and overlap in a way. But I wanted to not have a novel that's just sort of dwelling in the past or dwelling. So I wanted to give the characters something very tangible in the present that they have to deal with, right now, so that there's simultaneously those things going on.
With the different perspectives and ways of dealing with grief, do you think that there is a best way to do it?
No, I don't think there's a best way, but I do think that, Therese, for example, has, she decides early on that she can just cut it off and that she can just not deal with it, and then she realizes in the end that there is no cutting it off. So I think that the only thing I would say is that ignoring it is really horrible, and ignoring it for your children is really, 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 really devastating.
From those different perspectives, is there one character that relates to you the most, the way that you've dealt with grief in your life?
That's a good question. I think I have aspects of all of those. I think I've sort of tried all of those tactics, including, Adele's wonderfully irritating habit of narrativizing everything where she's the hero. And that's not my fault. Everything is about her getting her way out. I think I've done all of them in my lifetime. I kind of run the gamut.
My next question is about the mom.
Aha, Adele.
Adele.
Yes.
You've written a chapter from each of the siblings and the father. Why not Adele?
Well, did you meet Adele?
Yeah.
I mean, if I gave Adele a chapter, she would have just taken over the novel.
Right.
And so initially, that was another question. I can tell you that question. It wasn't a question. My editor said we need to see Adele because she wasn't actually in the novel, and I had to rewrite Annie's section so that she dealt with Adele.
Right, she does.
She does deal with Adele.
So you see the mother from other people's perspective.
My idea was that I wanted to create in a retreat, kind of a portrait in retreat, where we never saw her directly, but we got this. She's an overarching character. I mean, she influences everything. So I wanted it to be like that, but my editor said no. We need to see her in action. So she came in tentatively in Annie's section, which I think is great, and I think it shows why she has been such a force in all these characters' lives, and I hope it's a sympathetic portrait. Somebody said she's a beast, and I think that's unfair.
All the characters in the family, she's the one who really deals with the grief. Like, she's very outward with her grief, while others are sort of trying to deny it. I mean, is there anything behind that, and the fact that they maybe not hate her, but dislike that about her, that she shows her grief?
Well, she shows her grief, and I mean, when Joe dies, the parents lose their relationship, and they lose their son, right? But the children lose their parents, And so, when he dies, there is no, they never get consoled. Their grief is never acknowledged. Adele's grief isn't acknowledged, and Adele's grief becomes the palette for the family, and it becomes the script for the family dynamic for the rest of their lives. So, yeah, I think they're resentful that her narrative has been so dominant and that they don't have room for their narrative.
One of the questions that one of the characters asks in the book is, why ask why? When something happens, why ask why? Is that your own philosophy?
Well, that's definitely mine. I mean, no, I ask why all the time, but I've often been told, why ask why, don't ask why, It's not, why's not important, it's like what you do next, and I don't buy that. I think you have to have some processing of the event. You have to have some understanding. I mean, it's just, people think they can just accept something and move on. Well, you can't really accept it unless you understand it. And maybe you don't understand why it happened, but why permeates any given situation. And then there are all these unresolved, these unspoken emotional attachments to any given event. And those don't even, they're not even factored in. It's just we want to have the physical material event that we can deal with, and that's the limit of what we want to explain. And one understands, because as we see with Adele, there's all this magical thinking with her, and there's all these equations, and if her father hadn't picked up the phone, would the death not have happened? Doesn't really make any sense.
Right. Sina, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Now I'm with Kyle here at Type Books. Kyle, from all the books that you've read that deal with childhood and grief, is there a common theme that you've noticed?
I think that the theme with like grief and childhood in literature is sort of the impossibility of dealing with like childhood grief directly. So you see sort of the long term. You can see the ramifications on characters and their lives, or the way in which people sort of either succeed or fail at trying to deal with grief.
You have a few other recommendations here. Why don't we go through these? This first one here.
To the Lighthouse is about artistic awakening, but also just the idea of how the past is always weighing so heavily, on the present, like in people's present moment in their lives. Skippy Dies. This is a more contemporary book. It's about a really sort of special and brilliant child who's away at boarding school because he's been orphaned, and then he dies at the beginning of the book. He dies, and sort of there is a world sort of or sort of a secret part of his life just waiting for all of his friends to kind of uncover and figure out. It starts off very funny and gets quite dark.
And finally we have Algoma by Danny Couture.
Yeah, this is another contemporary novel, and it's about it's a story of twins, and it's the story of dealing with one twin dealing with the death of the other twin.
Kyle, thank you so much.
No problem.
So you can find info on these 3 books that Kyle recommends, as well as Sina's book, on our website, bookendstv.com.